Have you ever wondered what it's like to work as a game developer at a AAA studio on a big game with a lot of other people? If so, this is the perfect video for you. I'm going to talk about what that experience is like coming in as a new developer and being there for quite a while, and what it's been like for a lot of my friends. We'll talk about what people think developers do, like maybe they sit around and play video games all day, or maybe they're just playing foosball and ping pong or something and eating pizza, drinking Mountain Dew, and having parties, which honestly does happen quite a bit. Because sometimes people think that you're just crunching all day and like sitting in a little cave by yourself. You're like this little developer in a little dungeon and coding away or writing some little scripts. And well, honestly, there are some scenarios where that happens too. And I'll talk a little bit about them. There's one really cool one, and it's kind of interesting. I'll try to blab about that later. Anyway, I want to talk about this, share the experience with you to let you know what it's like to be a game developer, what it's like working with people who are game developers, kind of what those people and friendships can really be like, and a little bit about maybe how you can get into game development if you're interested and what those different opportunities are in the game development industry. Before we get started, though, make sure that you hit the like button, please. I really appreciate it. Hit that alert, subscribe, or just share the video. It really does help, and I appreciate it. It makes views go up, other people learn about game development. I get all kinds of awesome feedback, and I really appreciate it and motivates me to keep making lots more videos. So please hit the button, share it, appreciate it. All right, let's get going. So I just wanted to preface this by saying that obviously all studios are different. I'm going to share stuff based on my experience and the experience of a lot of my friends who I talk to regularly. I have heard some crazy horror stories from a couple people that I know, and they well, I'll share a little bit about those too. But I just want to let you know that they're not the norm, and maybe my experience isn't the norm either. Maybe I'm just in a little bubble and everybody else's experiences are terrible, but mine have been relatively good. So I'm going to get going with kind of what the day to day is like. So, what is it like when you come into work as a game developer? You're working in a studio. You've got this office where there are, 50 or 100 people working on this one project. And of course, I'm going to talk about this in a non working from home scenario. So, if you're working remote right now, this is going to be definitely a little bit different. But if you're going into an actual studio, what was that like? Well, first off, one of the I'd say most unique things about it is that everybody kind of starts at different times. It's not like a standard office where everybody comes in at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock and works until a very specific time. Almost every game studio that I know of and that I've got friends that work at has a relatively flexible work hour schedule where people come in. Some people come in as early as like 5 a.m., other people come in around 10 a.m., and then they work different hours. It's partially because of these places being in high traffic areas and making it so that people can avoid sitting in traffic forever. So you don't want to wait in traffic for 2 hours to make it there at a very specific time. But it's also because a lot of game developers are just kind of night owls and they stay up really late or get up really late, and it just works out really well for the team. And if half of the team or more of the team wants to work that later schedule and you can accommodate for it, which really we can in this kind of an industry, then it makes sense. So it's a really common thing for people to have somewhat staggered schedules. Usually you'll see that the schedule kind of has like a core set of hours in the middle around like that 10 to 2, 10 to 3 time for meetings and other things that need to happen where everybody needs to get together. But other than that, you'll see some big variety. Now, what about when you actually come in? What does that look like? Well, the first thing, at least on a programmer side, in fact, in pretty much every one of them, is that you're going to have some sort of a meeting. Sometimes these meetings will be weekly. It'll be like a weekly stand up meeting where the entire team gets together. You talk about, hey, what are we doing this week? How's everything going? How did everything go last week? Is there anything that we need to address? If not, or usually there's always going to be something, and we'll talk about that, figure out a plan for it. And this will be like a anywhere from a 10-minute to a 60-minute meeting, usually on the quicker end. It'll be relatively quick, and then people will break off and just start going to do whatever work they're doing. If you're a programmer, you'll be going in and either looking at some bugs that are in the bug queue if that's what you're on right there, or you'll be working on whatever the new feature is that you guys have already decided in a meeting that you've planned out. So you'll plan out like, hey, I'm going to work on this flying system for the game. I'm going to add flying to it, and that's going to be the thing that I'm working on for next week or two or three. And I'll be working on that project with somebody else. Usually it's not just one person. It'll be at least a programmer and an artist, or a programmer, an artist, and a designer. Sometimes a couple of each working on a system together to build it all out and put it together. And then we'll Get that so anyway, you'll go in, you get in after your meeting, you go start working on that or your bugs or whatever thing it is that you need to work on. And that process is just like any old game development. You're grabbing the latest version of the code, whatever's changed from last night. So you're using some sort of source control, pulling down the latest version right when you get in. And then you're merging in anything that might be related to your stuff. Usually that's not the case. Most of the time you're just doing a pull, making sure you have the latest stuff, and then you're continuing on with your work and then committing it as you go along. Now, if you're a game designer, it's going to be a little bit different. You're going to jump in and start implementing some design stuff. Or depends. You'll be doing one of two things. You'll either be going in and hopping right into meetings and talking to people about design ideas. So you'll be coming up with, what we're going to do here, why we're going to do it, and how it's going to work. And maybe talking with programmers to see what's actually feasible, if they can do it, and what the timelines are for the thing that you want to have done, the change that you want to have, or the new feature that you want to add into the game. And if you're not doing that, you'll be doing something like writing out docs for new stuff that you want to put together or implementing features in the game. So you might be in the engine or in some editor tools that allow you to put content into the game, writing up scripts or writing, not really like code scripts, but maybe quest scripts or something else or some in-game scripting system for hooking up objects or just placing things in the world. That's a very common thing for game designers to do as well. Be doing kind of a mix of that, and depending on how big the team is, you'll be specialized down further and further into a very tiny chunk. You could get down to the part where you're literally just writing quest text, and that's the only thing that you do if the team is big enough. But as the team shrinks, expect those responsibilities to grow. And I would expect that in almost any AAA project. After the game releases and goes out, the team is usually going to slowly shrink. Usually there will be a really quick shrink where a lot of the people leave, get laid off, switch to another team, or ideally it's that they start working on a new project. In fact, most of the time, in fact, all of the time that I've been on them, the people have left to go on to the next project at the studio. So say, hey, we're done with this one. Now there's opportunity to go on to the next one. You guys are all welcome to switch over, and then people will just start moving over. And it'll be a relatively quick transition, and then the teams shrink down. When that happens, expect your responsibilities to grow. Now, as an artist, I have no idea. I'm terrible at art. I don't know really what their day to day is like, other than they go in, make some really cool stuff, they draw things, build some models, talk to programmers, and try to figure out why the thing won't work in the game. That's, I'd say, the day to day of an artist. So, what about this whole hanging out playing video games? Does that actually happen? And honestly, yes. You're going to see quite a bit more video game playing just in the game industry, at lunchtime, but even during work hours, you'll see people playing games. Now, it's not an all-time thing. It's not you're going to see people just sitting there all day, every day playing video games. You might see one or two people doing that, but everybody knows who those one or two people are, and they're usually the ones that you know what happens to the people who aren't doing any work at all. But that's not normally the case. Normally, people will play a little bit of something, especially if a new game comes out that's a really big hit or a new game that's related to the thing that you guys are working on. You might see like a quarter of or half of the office just jumping in there on release day, playing it, trying it out. And there's good reason for it too. It's not like you're just sitting there playing video games just to screw around and mess around. You're also doing some actual market research here and looking at what works well in other games, what doesn't work well, and how their things play. Because if you're coding games and you're sitting there just working on your own game and you're kind of in a bubble of all you see is this and you don't see other things, it's really easy to not or just to miss the problems with your game and to not see the opportunities that other people are taking, and that are out there. And when you jump into other people's games, you see those a lot more. So you'll see that a lot of people will kind of get together and jump into these big things as they come out. But let's talk a little bit more about the work environment, though. So, what about the whole foosball, ping pong type stuff? The things that you see on TV, where there's big open office and there's people, I don't know, coming down slides and stuff. You watch Silicon Valley and there's all this unlimited food and drinks and things. Some of that is, well, obviously a bit exaggerated on TV and in the media and stuff, but some of it's relatively true. There were definitely, I'd say, ping pong type places or foosball things set up at just about every game studio I've seen. They have some kind of entertainment there just to let people relax and kind of unwind. And I think that part of it is just that they're run by people who like games and who like to do gaming stuff as a relaxation method. So instead of going out to bars all the time or whatever it is that other places do, or doing nothing, I guess, or having office parties. They tend to have these types of things. Now, they'll have things like drinks. That's definitely a thing too. So unlimited soda is almost always there. And that's honestly a bit of a problem for a lot of us because when you have unlimited soda and you don't make a ton of money, especially as you're starting off in the game industry or starting off in any industry, you have unlimited drinks that are not very healthy and you don't make a lot of money. You get tempted to drink a lot of them and it can cause you to get a little less healthy. It certainly caused me to gain some weight. And I can't obviously blame the soda for it because I drank them, but not thinking about them and not realizing how many calories just ingesting of unlimited free stuff can be a problem. So you'll see a lot of that though. There's unlimited drinks, lots of free food, lots of free snacks and things just to kind of celebrate and because a lot of the people just kind of like the same things. Now let's talk about the people. What are the people like when you work in the game industry? Well, they're probably about what you would expect. They're going to be a lot like anyone else who wants to work in the game industry, at least for the most part. You're going to have maybe 10-20% of the people there who really aren't very into games and just got into the company because of something else or something else that interested them, or they used to be a little bit into it, but they're not really into it. But most of the people there are going to be pretty heavy game enthusiasts. They joined the game industry because they like video games. They want to make video games and they're usually passionate about it. It's not usually the kind of job that people fall into. It's not the thing that, your uncle did, so now you do, and you just kind of got the job because he recommended you or something. It's the kind of job that you jump into because you're really excited about it and you're interested. So you're going to find that most of the people that you work with are relatively relatable to you, at least on that point. Now, obviously, everybody's going to be different. There's going to be a big variety of people, and you probably won't get along with everyone. But in my experience, people in the game industry tend to get along better than any other place that I've been. They tend to just be relatively friendly with each other, and they play games together. So it works out relatively good. Obviously, sometimes there can be creative differences, and you'll find little feuds of, I don't like this design, I don't like that design. Most of the time, though, you're not going to see that with programming or art. It's just about like design because they get a lot more, I guess, into it. They like their ideas. Like programmers don't generally care as long as the thing works. So you'll see a little bit of that, but like I said, it's very tiny. And in general, the people are really calm, really chill. They're gonna just they're very calm and very chill and very easy to be around for the most part. So I would say they're great people in general, and it's really where I've met most of my best friends. A lot of the people that I work with are still a lot of my best and closest friends, just because we get along. We really like the same things. We're into the same things, and we have something really cool to bond on, which is making video games. And we talk about that process and talk about what we're doing. It's just a blast. So I would say the people are probably one of the best parts. Other than showing off the cool thing that you just made to all of your friends and family, the people are, right up there. In fact, people are probably higher than that even. But it's still just a blast. So, all right, before I talk about how to get into video games, I want to talk real quick about releasing them and what that's like, because I think that that's a process that a lot of people don't realize anything about, because it's so different than I would have expected when I jumped into game development. I always thought that, hey, you build this game and you spend a lot of time, you're like crunching away on it, working hard. And, by the time you get to the end, you release it and you're done. And it's like this big joyous occasion. And you just get to sit back and relax and watch people play your thing and have a blast. It is, I would say, almost the opposite. Release day is probably the most stressful. And the time right after that is relatively stressful as well, because what you'll see is that you release it and there's inevitably going to be something wrong. This doesn't just happen with, releasing a full game. This even happens with releasing an update or a patch. You'll release it, and if there's big stuff in there, something may go wrong, and you're sitting there trying to figure out what's going wrong, debugging it, tracking it down forever, or trying to optimize things, especially after a game release. You're trying to optimize and figure out, why did this fall apart on this system? What's going on here? Why is everything broken? How do we fix all these mini emergencies? And you'll end up with all, dozens of these little micro emergencies that you're trying to track down. So you'll think that release time is like the relaxing one. It's really not. The most relaxing time seems to be honestly right around like project starting. And the project's getting going and ramping up, and you're kind of mostly coming up with ideas and planning out what you want to do, and you don't have all the technical debt, you don't have all of the problems built in and all of the requirements. That's the easy part. That's the relaxing part. Release time is totally different, not even close to relaxing. Now, I want to talk real quick about crunching too. I know I said I'd talk about how to get into games, but first I want to talk about crunching because this is just something that I've seen people worry about, talk about, and I've done videos about myself. Now, crunching is this concept of essentially, well, really working crazy hours. I mean, I think some people would call it working more than their allotted hours or more than their 40 hours a week on a long term or medium term basis for a week or 2 weeks or something, or even for months or years. There are some places that the real problem comes from there are some places who have a tendency to have people work for 60 plus hours a week on a regular basis, like almost year round. And not it's not always enforced. It's not always like a thing where people have to do it, where they're told like, hey, you need to be here for these hours. It's instead just kind of a factor of them being given the amount of work that's going to require them that much time to get it done and not being able to push back on it, not being able to say, hey, this isn't a realistic time frame and I can't do that in this time. So a lot of time it's that. Sometimes it's just like a, hey, we have all these things, they have to be done in this time, and we everybody is doing it, and they're really focused. Like the team's all crunching. And that's okay for me. Like if it's the whole team's doing it for like a week, and there's like a thing going on right around release, usually like on release day, like I was just talking about, release day is a good time. That release week or the week after, maybe the next 2 weeks might be a good time where you'll see a lot of people putting in a lot of work. They're working a lot of crazy hours. But if they're not offsetting that right afterwards with a lot of extra time off, relaxing time, and a bunch of downtime, then I think it's a terrible idea because you burn people out and you get disgruntled, burnt out employees who are less productive. You don't get as much stuff done. So you need to make sure that obviously you're not doing that very much. But again, I said all this because people worry about it, but it's not something that I've seen as a regular thing. Most of the time when people are crunching, it's just that they are voluntarily doing it. They're voluntarily sitting there just working crazy amounts of hours and they probably don't even consider themselves crunching. They just, tell the amount of hours that they work and people assume that that's like some forced thing. Now, part of that is just a passion thing. Game developers tend to be very passionate about what they're doing, very into it, and a lot of the time very single-minded. So we'll just get into it. And I've done this myself. I'll get into something and just work on it for hours and hours and hours nonstop for weeks. And I just can't stop until it's done because I'm so into it. So sometimes that happens, but most of the time, you don't really need to worry about this forced crunching where you're going to be working 50, 60 hours a week and getting paid for 40. That's not a normal thing in game development for most companies. Now let's get on to getting into game development. So how do you become a game developer if you want to be in or just work in the game development industry? There are a bunch of different options and a bunch of different routes to get in. If you're good at art and you like drawing, you like making 3D stuff or 2D stuff, obviously being an artist is a great option. It's a relatively simple and straightforward thing to do because you can create your art, you can show your art, and if your art matches what people want, they can hire you. There's not a whole lot to it. There's not a whole lot of gray area to it, at least not in my experience. You'll want to know a lot of the tools that the game studios are using. So if you want to get into art, make sure that the studios you're looking at, you understand what tools they're using for their development pipeline and you get familiar with those. But outside of that, I don't think there's too much to it. Now there probably is, and some artists going to come in here with great comments and ideas on how to get hired as an artist. If you have those, let me know. I'm terrible at art. For designers, I think it's quite a bit harder. It's very hard to get in and get hired as a designer just because there's so many people who want to do it and it's really hard to prove your design experience without working on a game at first. So one of the things I recommend to anybody who wants to get in on design is to start in the QA department. Get a job in the QA department, testing the game, giving good feedback, and making some connections in there. It's a very good way to get into design. In fact, I'd say probably half of the designers, if not more, that I know started off in a QA department or a customer service department. That's another option, joining a customer service department for a game. Now, that only works, though, if the CS department is actually tightly coupled with the development team. If you have a CS department that's outsourced or relatively separate from your development team where you're not talking to the developers daily, I don't think you're going to get that same value. But if you have a QA or CS team that's interacting regularly, with the development team, it's a good way to get into design. Now for programming, it's a little bit different, but not too different. Getting in through QA is always a good option. If you could just learn how to, one thing you can do is obviously learn how to create games, build up a small portfolio of your own stuff, and then you can use that to get in and get hired into a studio. That works pretty well as long as you're able to build the games and make a studio, or make a portfolio, show off what you've actually been able to do and communicate what you can do. You want to make sure that you're still using the same tools that whatever studio you want to apply for is using, just like as an artist. But outside of that, there's not too much to it. There are some other ways to get in as a programmer, though. One of the ways is obviously through QA. That's one of the things I just mentioned for designers. In fact, that was how I got my first game programming job, was doing programming tools for the QA department. I got a QA department tools programming job, and then quickly morphed that into game development, doing server side stuff and database stuff, and then client stuff, and just kept going from there. So it's a good way to get in through that QA department. Another option is to get in through the tools department. The tools will vary a little bit on what they are. They're going to be completely different from one, well, not completely. They'll be different from one studio to another. Some studios will have a lot of art specific tools that they need done. Some will have a lot of data specific tools. And if you can find one that, you figure out what the studio that you're interested in needs for tool stuff, and that's something that you can learn and figure out and understand and actually be able to do, it's a good way to get in because there are a lot less people applying for those positions. So you can get in, learn that stuff, and then again, make transitions along the way as you learn more things. Now, I'd recommend, of course, if you want to get into a studio that's not super competitive, you're not trying to get into Blizzard or Riot or some place where there are thousands of applicants for every job, to just try to go in as a junior game developer or a game developer doing code for the game. Ideally, if you can't get in through that one though, or those positions aren't available or they're too competitive, then I would recommend trying the other route and getting in through those, because it just tends to work. I know a lot of people who've done it, and it's a relatively quick path too. You start to make friends, and again, the people, like I mentioned before, are really cool. So it's easy to make friends there. It's easy to bond with people and start to show what kind of stuff you can do, and get into those positions a lot easier. So I think that was pretty much all I had to say about this. I'm sure I could blab about this forever. I really did want to talk a little bit about the EQ1 cave that Justin had set up with his cube, and it was all closed off. Sometimes people really like their privacy and they want it dark and closed off, and you can find at least a couple of those. And nothing against them. It was just interesting, especially Halloween, and get it all decorated up, and it was cool. That was another thing. Halloween and parties and stuff, man, everybody goes all out. So I really liked it. Anyway, I'm going to shut up about all this. I wanted to end this by saying thanks. Remind everybody that if you want to learn how to code, I got a game developer course. You can check out the link down below. And to, again, please hit the subscribe, like button, share this, and all that stuff. And again, thanks to everybody on Patreon as well. Really appreciate it. All right, goodbye, everybody, and have a great day. Again, get into being game developers. It's a blast. I wouldn't do anything else.